Oh my gosh, you guys. So I am recording with one of my new girlfriends, Shweta, who's over in Singapore, which was one of my absolute favorite places on the planet Earth to visit. My husband and I have talked about going back because we want to have you done the whole walk across the country? Have you done that?
I have to admit, no.
Oh my gosh, that's something that we so want to do. The friends of ours that we met when we were over there, they're like, you've got to come back and you've got to do the walk across the country. Because how long is the country or how wide is it?
It's about 13 by 42.
Yeah, 13 by 42. I could do that. We could do that. That would be so fun. That's totally what we're into. But I'm so grateful for you being here and staying up late for me.
Thrilled to be doing this with Christina.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So Shweta and I met because we were in a YPO group together, a YPO group chat together. And she mentioned to me that, obviously your background in unbelievable corporate world and then your transition now is something similar to what I do in completely different ways, but so similar. So we jumped on a Zoom a couple weeks ago and I was like, we have to do this because I am so obsessed with talking about how leaders can become better humans and learn from their heart and their gut and having some sort of leadership kind of knowledge inside of themselves that allow them to truly trust themselves and allow them to have a better experience as being leaders. And I know that so many people listening to this podcast are really going to resonate. So I'm so grateful that you're here.
Thank you. Indeed, Christina. One of the things that, so I have about 2 decades of work experience across companies, across both Fortune 50, big 3 consulting firms. And one of the things that I noticed was that there was a significant difference between leaders that created organizations that were thriving and businesses that were flourishing consistently over a long period of time. Compared to leaders that were brilliant, they created results that were a flash in the pan, a couple of years of good results, but could not build, retain great organizations as well as not deliver consistent results. And that difference was their level of awareness of their own internal emotional states, and their level of awareness of their impact on others, on their organization as they engaged. And I noticed time and again over that 2-decade-long executive career that was the single biggest determining factor in my lived experience on how well was a leader able to build a consistent, thriving business and organization. So now what I do is go on.
No, please. Sorry. There was a bit of a delay, so I apologize for cutting you off. Please go ahead.
So I was saying, in the last 10 years, apart from, my continued corporate, stint, I was delving into contemplative meditation and, which created an acute awareness within me of, my own emotional awareness, but made me a lot more aware of, where everyone was on the spectrum, just, by virtue of how they showed up. And that was how I started to notice these links. And now what I do is I work with senior leaders, CEOs, board chairs, founders, and investors to help them transform their businesses through transforming their own emotional, states.
Okay, I love this. But how did you come about? Because I think that is one of the most important parts of this story is how did you get to the place? Obviously, I know a little bit about you and we've talked before and I know your background, but how did you get to that point where you decided, wow, I have to do something different?
And indeed, since the podcast is about that, deciding that it's your turn, it was definitely, a journey for me. So what happened was somewhere around midway of my corporate career, on paper, everything looked perfect. I had this, dual career. My husband and I were both in what one would call high-powered executive, roles. We used to do this thing called the airport handover. I would land, we would meet for coffee, he would take off, and just so that somebody was in town with the kids. It was a constant ballet of calendars and meetings. The kids were young. My father had just passed on and I was my mom's emotional caregiver at that time. And at some point of time, all that picture perfect existence started to crumble. It still looked great externally, but I was starting to feel signs of stress, anxiety, and I was fortunate that that was how I stumbled into meditation. I always say this, that breakdown leads to breakthrough. And that was essentially what happened. I started to look for things that could help me with it. And I was kind of practicing several different types of meditative practices, and I finally kind of chanced upon some that I pieced together and rolled with. And it was very interesting in that the transformation takes some time. It's not that you meditate one day and bam, you're suddenly a lot more present and grounded and calm. It did take years, but then I started noticing some small changes within me. Soon enough, my family started noticing, the kids started noticing. But the best one was somewhere in the middle of COVID. I was running $1 billion business at that time, for the company that I was working with, highly profitable, very crucial business, the kind that if the quarter doesn't deliver for this business, there's no way that the company that you're working for could make it up on the total base, just because the business you were working on was that central, to the P&L. And this was a business related to travel. And then COVID hit. I was running the global business in airports around the world. And all of a sudden, bam, not a single traveler, not a single customer in the shops globally. And I remember 3 weeks into the crisis, and it was a crisis for world over, and most definitely for that business that was hinged on traveling, that someone in the team they asked me, my God, Shweta, the shit has hit the proverbial roof. But here you are, really, really calm and centered. And somehow you're able to focus on what is it that we can do? What is it that we can control? And what was that? That was, I couldn't control the fact that COVID was here, and turns out it was there to stay for long. But I could control what we could do with our, 600 strong staff in airports around the world. I could control what we could do in terms of pivoting the business model to be able to still serve the consumer, except they were not going to travel now, and, ideate on how we would do that as a team. But that was the moment that it hit me that this meditation practice, this mindfulness practice, had essentially helped me learn where to focus my energies on and be able to let go, where I have no control. I have no agency. And that was the moment when I went, oh my God, this is a superpower, not just for your daily life or for your well being, but also for business. So, mindfulness does power business. I personally witnessed and experienced that, and others experienced that of me. And that was the reason at some point in time I said, this is what I want to do now.
Oh my gosh, I love it, because I feel like we've all had those moments in time where you have that flick of a switch, like, oh my gosh, even though it did not make sense why you had started this practice so many years ago, you were obviously taking care of yourself, you and your husband were traveling, super high powered executives, your father had passed away, you just had so much on your shoulders, you did it for you. But then there was that switch where it became so much more for your business, and it made so much sense in the moment. You're just like, oh, this was the reason why I was going to do this. I mean, for me, it's like I'm sometimes able to look back at my golf career, and like some people would not associate what I do now with my golf career. But I just like being able to look back, just like anything, right? You can look back and connect the dots, but like when you're in it, it just does not make any sense until it makes all of the sense. And so thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important for people to hear it, because sometimes I think if you're in that middle section, or you're just kind of like, why am I doing this? How is it really going to help me? Sometimes in the middle, you can't really see why it's so important. And then there'll be that like flash in the pan where you're just like, oh, I get it now.
You've said it, and of course some of these are journeys are more gradual, right? And I most definitely experienced the gradual part of it as well, in that when during COVID I had that aha, I said, oh my God, I need to do something now that I know that this powers business. So what I started to do is I of course I had my day job running $1 billion P&L, but I started to sort of voluntarily start to sponsor mindfulness for business sort of training for P&G globally. And we reached, at the time that I was with P&G, we reached about 5,000 or so, folks within the company with the training. And, we were still working on expansion plans. But then after COVID had ended and, life was starting to be back to normal, travel was back to normal. One day, I remember I traveled back from Korea on a red eye flight, business trip. I come back, land in the morning, see the kids off just as they're going to school, hit office again, come back around 6 p.m., dinner with the kids. And then as I pack the kids, I tell my husband, I have a call now. And he says, you need to take a little break. And I said, no, this is a call for the mindfulness for business training. We're talking how to kind of outreach it in Panama and Chile and Greater China and whatnot. And he said one thing to me. He said, while you're trying to fix everyone's well-being, make sure you don't lose yours again. And that was a moment of, wow, this is what I want to do for a living now. That was the moment when I went, well, it's true. I can't do the day job and more of this constantly, right? It would tell on my well-being. But if I had to choose between the two, this had taken priority now. So that was my aha moment of, I want to spend full-time energies doing this.
Oh my gosh, that's just like, it hits right to your core, right? I think everyone sometimes has those like aha moments that just hit them straight up on the face. And I think sometimes we need I know for myself or whatever, it was more of like the universe had to slap me in the face. It was more of that moment where I was like, for me, it was really going full time during COVID. It was like, I remember the Thursday. I remember it like it was yesterday. I had probably, multiple six figures worth of corporate golf gigs lined up for that summer. And it was like Thursday, the phone started ringing. We're canceling. We're postponing. We're canceling. And like, for me, it was just like a few $100,000 worth of income, just like gone in the matter of a second. And I was like, oh my God. And I had like a 2-day breakdown. And then I was like, you know what? F this. I will figure it out and I will make it up in my coaching business. And that's really when I think God just kind of opened that door for me to truly do what I was supposed to be doing. And sure enough, I made it up times that, you know what I mean? It was just like this miracle moment. But it was because I had been putting in the work just like you ahead of time. Something that you said that I think was so good, and I want people to hear it, is before you knew that it was going to be your occupation, you started taking action to do it in P&G, like I just want to offer this service because it's changed my life. And you were willing to do it before it made sense of how you were going to monetize it. I see a lot of people sometimes getting stuck in the beginning stages because they don't know how to monetize it right off the bat. But you believed in it so much. And very similar to myself, I would have gone to coffee with every human on the planet to talk about this for hours because I cared about it so deeply. And I think it's interesting that you were willing to offer it to P&G, like this global company, and you're like, here, this is changing my life. How can we use it? And you did it before it was an actual your career to monetize.
Yes, in fact, firstly, I think there's a lot of power in small steps, right? In fact, there's a lot of research now that suggests that we tend to imagine that changes are these done in this fell swoop, with a flourish, and but actually, the biggest changes happen more incrementally, and they happen over time. And there's a lot of research again around, for example, habit building, right? Work by Charles Duhigg, James Clear, all of that suggests that habit building is essentially changing the way you do something, and change, when it's done incrementally, builds upon the momentum of itself over time. Secondly, in the context of transitioning into something, I found that I learned some very precious lessons from it. So one of the lessons that I learned as I was doing this, in my sort of night job, sponsoring and driving the program, was on how to engage with other senior business leaders like myself on what were the business sort of benefits of mindfulness and meditative practices. What were the real business applications? So that was one. The second was, of course, it was also a period of time where I was starting to build my capabilities. Even though I was a meditator myself, I was building capabilities in terms of facilitation and being able to teach it to others, overall, but also in the business context. The third very important lesson I learned, Christina, was on the fact that as we rolled out more and more of the programs around mindfulness for business, one of the interesting things we learned was that you can transform the managerial population, the employees, but you will get a lot more bang for buck and bang for time if the leaders are transforming with the organization. If you leave the leaders behind, and you aim to transform the rest of the organization, sometimes it can be nigh painful for the organization to kind of be put back in the context where their leader is operating a certain way, while you've changed the managers and the way they operate on account of such a training. And to be fair, that's the case for anything. Like I because I come from a marketing and a sales background, there are all of these sales trainings where if you're looking to change the way, for example, the selling is done or persuasive selling is done, in an organization whose key sort of mandate is to sell. But if you don't teach that selling to the managers, the leaders first, the whole initiative falls flat in its face, because the managers are the leader that's still expecting a certain way of being and operating. So whether it's sales, whether it's mindfulness, the one thing I learned out of that, those little baby step experiments, was that bring the leaders along, and that's what I now do. I, in fact, focus exclusively on leaders because they're leading the way, and they, once you have the leaders buy-in, you're able to drive it in the organization with significant network effect as well.
That reminds me so much of what I say when I talk to my clients about when they're, trying to, teach their kids, because it's like habits are taught, or habits are caught, not taught. And it's the exact same theory of what you're talking about with your leaders, which is if your leaders are telling you to do something and they're not actually implementing it and living it themselves, it's going to be so much harder for your employees to get on board with. But if your leader is actually walking the walk and talking the talk, your employees are going to catch the habits. They are going to do the things that you are doing, and it does absolutely 100% start from the top. I totally believe it. That's one of the things that I even talk about, and I'm sure you do the exact same thing in your business, is like, if I didn't do there's nothing that I could tell my clients to do that I am not willing to do or I haven't done in the past in order to get here. And I think you're bang on with those small steps, and you're bang on when it comes to it starts from the top. It is just so much easier for someone to catch the habits and being really bought into why this matters so much if our leaders are a big part of it.
Absolutely. I love the habits are caught, not taught. And I would can that with your permission.
I took it from someone else.
I most definitely feel the same, that being able to embody what you're teaching, right, you to your clients, me to mine, is crucial. And reality is, I think a client can see through how much of your work you embody. Often it will translate into how they're internalizing what you're working on with them. It will also translate into how deep you go with them in the work. Right. For example, in the work that I do, I work with leaders with certain frameworks that I have. I have a framework called Veda, which is a way of being, a mindset shift. I have a framework called Emotion Sip, which is about understanding emotions and being able to surf them, interchange uncomfortable to comfortable emotions, and being able to pole emotions, understand what they're trying to tell you. So these are just some of the frameworks I use, but I don't just use them with the leaders. The leaders that go really deep with the work then almost always want to bring it to their organizations in the context of, say, a business challenge or a transformation, right? But they will make the choice to go deeper with you and bring you all the way into their organization only if they see you embody that, right, in the interactions that you have with them. So agree completely.
100%. In my industry right now, there's just been this switch to being a little bit more vulnerable. And yet I was like, oh, I got them. Like, who didn't get the memo? I've been doing this for such a long period of time. I've tried to be as vulnerable as possible because I feel like that's what gets people bought in. Like, I mean, if I'm going to tell you that my life's perfect, if I'm going to tell you that everything's simple and easy for me, if I'm going to tell you that I never have a bad day, you'll always feel like you're never going to get it. You'll always feel like you're so far behind. And I really just try to be as vulnerable with my clients as possible and my audience as possible, because like it is a journey, just like yourself. I'm sure meditation, like I'm not a huge meditator, but I do know there's no like final point. And that's what I always say with my clients. I'm like, if you think you've finally accomplished it all, we better keep going, because there is no final ending point. It's just like that progressive. I always say it's like going from here to here. Like, how can we progressively just get better and make the time shorter and know what the tools are in order to support ourselves and to support our organization? Something that you said is one of the frameworks that you use is from uncomfortable to comfortable. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think it would be interesting for us to kind of see what one of those frameworks is. You could use an example, but just to help the audience that maybe they're not a leader of a $1 billion company, but just in our everyday, how can we use this?
Uh, so one of the things that I aim to teach around emotional awareness is just learning to be in touch with your emotions. And reality is most of us are actually scared to be in touch with our emotions.
100%. I
Uh,
agree.
the uncomfortable ones, for sure, because we don't like the way they feel. We're often a little afraid of how we will act out. When we experience those emotions, if we haven't learned to regulate ourselves, but also often some of us are afraid of the happy emotions. I'm using a simpler word, just to demonstrate the point. But I've met folks who are not as much in touch with their own excitement or joy or anticipation, because they would much rather protect the downside of disappointment, protect themselves from that, than allow themselves to feel the excitement. But more often than not, most of us, uncomfortable emotions are a challenge. When actually, and I ported this concept from the contemplative practice that I have. So a lot of traditional contemplative practices, talk about the concept of how opposite emotions are, in fact, they're sides of the same coin. And when you're experiencing, for example, fear, and that's an emotion I work with, with a lot of my leaders, because often when they're making big business decisions in hairy, sticky situations, right, or there's boardroom politics, there is a lot of fear. There is insecurity. Often, the fear is at one end, but on the other end, it's actually there's excitement. So there is excitement around whatever you're afraid of. You're afraid of something failing or something not working out. But equivalently, there is a possibility that it would work out, and there is excitement behind that. So, but in order to access that excitement, access that hope, you have to first go through the fear. In fact, there's this children's, I have young kids, and there's this beautiful book. I think it's called We're Going to Meet the Bear or something like that. I'm forgetting the name of the exact book. But, it basically, the book is entirely about, can you go above it? No, you can't. Can you go below it? No, you can't. You've got to get through it. And, it goes on and on, explaining the concept of just having to go through what is uncomfortable. And, so I teach a way of being in which you're able to access that emotion, accept it, even embrace it. And then once you do that, how you can in fact experience the other side of it. If the uncomfortable emotion is the head, how do you experience the tail, right, which is sometimes the more comfortable or the more acceptable emotion. And from that, how do you then change that emotional modality for, say, a whole enterprise team in a workshop, and then be able to create business plans that emerge out of that excitement and that hope.
That's so helpful, I think, because it is true. I try to help my clients do something similar. Obviously, we do it in different ways, but it's almost like, okay, what if? What if this does happen? What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? And most of the time, by the time that they go through all of the what ifs, they're like, I guess I'm just going to figure it out, because I always have. I guess I've always been able to get to the point that yes, all of these things could happen, but at the end of the day, I'm going to figure it out. I've been in this really crappy spot before, and guess what? I'm here now. And, I also think that works really well with a person who is at their lowest end, because it's like, okay, worst case scenario, you go back to where you are.
Right. Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that, I've learned over time is that what you resist persists.
Oh,
so
good. Say that again.
What you resist persists. And, the more we resist a certain emotion or an experience, it continues to persist in our experience. And that happens often with fear, with uncertainty. It's actually not the fear of the thing. It is the fact that in our mind, we keep rolling with the fear again and again. We're powwowing with it again and again. And that's why it continues, versus, if you were to sit down and, as I said, there are these techniques I teach around surfing and interchanging and polling the emotion. And as you do that, actually the hold that emotion has on you finally releases. And there's that sense of release, and then you can access the other side of the coin as well.
So good. I'm so curious because I know a little bit, you explained a little bit about your family history and all the things. So when you went, because I think that this is so helpful for someone to hear from yourself, you were in charge of a section of P&G that did over $1 billion. You were the VP, GM, whatever those high titles. You left that corporate career to step out to do something on your own. Did you use these same techniques for yourself? Because surely I'm probably not far off here, because I'm sure the audience listening is like, what? This girl left that type of role to do her own thing? Like, is she crazy? But also, like, I totally resonate. And I know that there's someone else out there who's totally going to resonate, whether it's the family stories, whether it's the financial safety, whether it's what are people going to think. Like, take us through that moment when you really got to the point that you're like, yeah, I'm going to do this damn thing.
Thank you for asking. And this is one of my favorite stories. It's a bit of my origin story. So I belong to a family that was, when it moved, my parents moved, my mom and my father moved from a village in India to a small city. They moved with a bicycle with 6 bowls and spoons and the shirts on their backs. And that was where my brother and I were born to them in the city. And then, my mother was such a visionary. You have to give it to her. I'm sitting in front of you having this conversation in the language that we're having a conversation in English, because my mom had a dream. My mom's dream was that her daughter would be able to read the English newspaper. Mm-hmm. That was all she wanted of me, that I would be able to read the English newspaper, something she still can't do to this day. And what she did was, when we moved to the city, she took me to the school that was actually quite far away from where we were living, because it was still a very small city. She took me to the school which the medium of instruction was English, because again, in India there are many schools. In fact, majority of schools teach in the local languages. And I sat down for the exams, and I made it through the admission thing. And then, as they were asking for the details, she was writing her address, and they said, "Oh no, we can't admit her if this is where you live." And she said, "Why?" Because they said, "We having her here, that's really far away." And she said, she literally begged them and convinced them to let me join that school, and said she would figure out the transport. So for 16 years of my life, I traveled 100 kilometers every day, commuted 100 kilometers a day just to go to the school where my mom wanted me to be able to be instructed in English. So that's where I come from. And I'm very fortunate that, I was good academically, got to go to the best schools and business schools, in India, with great opportunities, with amazing companies, in global roles. All of that has happened. And you're right that all of that has given me access to both opportunities, impact, and the financial, sort of benefits of that it was a hard decision. But the hardest thing was actually, Christina, telling my mom that this is what I wanted to do, because my mom was so deeply invested in this traditional definition of success for her daughter. And she'd done a lot to get me there, and I'm deeply grateful. But there was definitely a time where I went, I think I'd rather fail at what I want to do than succeed or continue to succeed at what I was doing. And that was the time I realized that I needed to have a conversation with mom. So you're right. I did use these techniques on myself. I accessed and sat with that fear I remember it took me 3 weeks of consistent application of some of these processes to get to a stage where I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to have that conversation with mom. And it took me several conversations with her. And I have to tell you, it was almost a 9-month period. But finally, in fact, 3 or so weeks ago, the first time I heard her articulate the excitement rather than the fear of, what it is that I'm doing. And that was very heartening in that moment. But it took a long time, both for my preparation and to get her to this stage.
It's so interesting. I know so many people are going to listen to that. And by the way, as you were talking, just so our American followers know, 100 kilometers is about 60 miles, folks. So every day she went about 60 miles so she could go to the school. And I know that that is just the true deep passion of love that your mom had for you and wanting you to do something different. And it is like so many of you moms listening, you will do those crazy things for your children because you want the best for them. And on the flip side of the coin, this is the part that I really want you to hear is that sometimes, and I remember a guest told me on year one of this podcast many years ago, it was a guy who was very controversial, and his parents were from, it was an Asian country. He was half, I think it was Filipino. And he talked about how his parents were literally his favorite people on planet Earth. And they literally wanted the best for them. They sacrificed everything to bring him to America. And yet he knew that pleasing his parents was not what was going to make him successful and happy. And I want people to hear that from people like who have been on the podcast, from myself, from you. I want people to hear that sometimes you are going to have to disappoint your parents. Sometimes you are going to have to disappoint your friends, your spouses, people the closest to you, because they ultimately don't know what is best for you. And your mom was living that dream for you, but that wasn't, this has no longer become your dream. And I think that point, and sometimes like her mom now, Shweta's mom is now on board. But there are so many people that I've worked with where their parents are not on board still to this day. It took me years. I remember it was like it was yesterday. Like there are still people in my family that do not even think what I do is a real job. There's people in my family that don't think it's like this woo-woo bullshit, like crazy psycho person. And yet I remember it was like yesterday when I literally showed my dad my Stripe account where like it had like over $1 million or something like that. And I just remember going, that moment where he was like, oh my God, you're like the people on the internet. It's like a weird moment for me, but it was like this crazy moment that I was like, oh, he gets it. Yeah.
Oh, what you just said is so powerful. I think, two things there. One is, I think it's important to realize that more often than not, most of the people who love us, who are as deeply invested as often parents are, they do it out of love. It's just that their definition of, what will make us happy, right, is skewed. And it's a journey to take them through, to help them understand what now makes you happy, because there was a point of time where perhaps what made her and me happy was the same, the traditional definition of success, the financial largesse that came with it, but it's changed now. And just being patient with that process, where as I said, it took her 9 months, because at the starting, she was like, so what are you doing now? When people ask me, it was so easy to say BCG and PNG. And what do I tell them? You're a board director and you do this leadership thing. And she was like, I don't want any of this, back into that thing that was easy for me to boast to my friends about. That was where she was 9 months ago. And now she's like, wow, I'm seeing you're really energized with what you do. And every time I call you, you're full of new ideas. And the energy is palpable in you, was what she noticed. And that is finally making her realize that I, in a sense, have what it is that she's wanted for me all along, happiness or contentment. So that's one. But the other one that you mentioned is also true. Sometimes, I notice that for some people who are important to us, and they're important, we're important to them, we'll have a sense of identity enmeshed with what it is that we do. So, whether it's a husband or a best friend or whatever, I had certain very interesting conversations where that relationship and their own identity was so, in a complex way, related to what I did for a living, that it required some unpacking. But again, most of those people have truly come along on that journey, and it's very heartening to see their reactions. And as they also start to recalibrate what it means to be me now. Very enriching, but yes, scary to start.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting too, because I think you give other people permission. And I think that that is so important. It doesn't really matter what the journey is. It doesn't matter for me in my coaching practice. It doesn't matter for Shweta in her leadership coaching practice as well. It doesn't matter what the actual thing is. You know, her thing is her thing, my thing is my thing, and your thing is your thing. But it's like you're almost giving other people permission to do their thing. You know, I remember years ago, I did a speech and I don't know how it came to me, but I was just like, if you want to bake the cupcakes, bake the cupcakes. And it was just like this moment where I was just like, I just thought of this silly little thing. And then sure enough, a woman comes up to me after and she said, you know, I've wanted to start my own bakery for such a long time. She's like, I have this corporate job. I remember like it was yesterday, it was way before the pandemic. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I was giving this speech to these women. And she was like, I'm so passionate about it. She's like, I come home and I bake. I bake on the weekends. I bake at night. I bake she's like, I'm so afraid to do this silly little baking thing. And I thought to myself, I was like, you know, that's the permission that she needs to do the thing that's on her heart. It may not be leadership. It may not be coaching. It may be baking. It may be gardening. And I also think too, for some people, like the permission that it doesn't actually have to make you money. So Shweta and I are both talking about like our now businesses and our incomes and our livelihood, but like it doesn't always have to actually make you money. Have you found that to be the case when you're in your leadership?
You know, firstly, I love that story because it's almost as if though that idea, you know, to be able to say that bake the cupcakes was literally planted by the universe for that.
Totally, 100%. I believe that to my core.
But yes, you know, there's this incredible book by Stephen Pressfield, if you ever read him. So he, of course, does. He's written a few great Hollywood screenplays, great writer, mostly fiction, but he's also put out a few great books on like my favorite one of his entire collection of nonfiction books is called The War of Art. So it's a wordplay
I have heard of it. Yes.
The War of Art. And he says, look, it could be writing, which is what it is for him. It could be, you know, a coaching thing like it is for you, or it could be a plumbing business. But there is something in you waiting to be expressed. And until you express that, you're likely going to say, he says, you're going to stay sick or depressed or whatever it is that condition that you're going through, right? But when you get out there and start to do it is, you know, when the juices really, really start to flow. So completely agree that it's not about your livelihood. It's not what you do for a living. It is, you know, what it is that is wanting to be expressed through you and allowing it that permission. And how beautifully you said that when you give yourself that permission, others tend to ask themselves, can I give myself that permission to? I'm definitely seeing that with some of my friends, who are looking at this transition and using it as a way of, just assessing, are they ready for a transition? What does a transition look like? And then that itself is very powerful to be able to, in a way, craft a journey for yourself and possibly inspire that for others.
Love it. And this leads me to one of the other things that you and I were talking about is like, if someone is on the fence about making that decision, and decision making is obviously this is all about deciding, making the decision, deciding it's your turn, but you have a really fantastic tool in making decisions. Do you want to kind of talk about that? Because I think that this is a perfect spot for it.
Absolutely. So, one of the interesting things, about decisions, and since the podcast is about, making that decision, taking that leap, right, is that we all often believe that decisions are made in the head, right? We think, there are pros and there are cons, and I'm going to list what those are and talk it out with my closest friends or family and thrash it all out in my mind and then emerge with this clarity. When actually, decisions are more often than not made by our gut. And then we use the conscious brain, the prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning, logical thinking to be able to rationalize that decision to our own sort of conscious selves, our head, as well as to others in conversations as we explain that decision or look for executing that decision with other people's, buy-in. So one of the things that I work on, with leaders is to help them access the three very distinct regions, from where we gather the information and process it to to be able to make decisions. So those three unique regions are, of course, the head. The intellect is absolutely involved, the logical brain. But at the same time, our heart is involved, right? Emotions are involved, right? But the final piece that's involved is our intuition, right? Our gut, which is why, I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast will be able to relate to a story when they went, there was a decision I was about to do or take, and, I just couldn't do it, or I just knew I had to do it, and you couldn't explain why. That was your gut making the decision for you, and making it in so loudly that even though there were no words, you still knew exactly what needed to be done. So I help leaders access those three, and more importantly, then integrate them. Because again, when we say the head, the heart, and the gut, more often than not, we believe that they're not in sync, right? Because we think the logical brain is probably, for example, thinking of a livelihood transition, perhaps thinking of the financial aspects, and then it sounds like a binary decision. The heart might want to follow something that you have passion for. The gut might, think about whether you have the skills for it or not. But it's about actually not a binary yes or no to most decisions. I help them access what are the parameters that they're looking to maximize in a decision such that they will have an X or Y or Z experience when they execute that decision. So integrating the head, the heart, and the gut, and being able to frame the decision, the question, in a way that helps them articulate the parameters they're actually wanting to design their life through. So that's what I do, and I'd be happy for perhaps your audience to be able to try out a survey where they can learn what is their head, heart, and gut mix and awareness in their current decision making process.
Absolutely, you guys. So be sure to check out the show notes. And the day that this comes out, I'll be sure to share the link on my social media. And Shweta is over on LinkedIn. So you can go find her on LinkedIn, only on LinkedIn. I've started posting a little bit more on LinkedIn. Well, not me, but my team. But all of that to be said, you can find her there, follow her there. She has great content. Also, too, is there anywhere else that we can find you? Any other resources that we have? We'll definitely be sure to link that in the show notes. Like I said, you can find her on LinkedIn. Is there anything else that we need to know on how to contact you, how to follow you, how to reach out to you, all of the things?
LinkedIn is great, Christina, but also my website. So I work on, upping the leadership quotient of leaders around the world. So my company is called Grow LQ. I'll share it in the show notes for you, and you can look me up there.
Perfect. Amazing. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. I'm so grateful that we connected. I am so grateful that you are actually doing this. Is there other people that are doing this? Are you like one of the only unicorns? Because I just think that this is like, I could scream it from the rooftops. I am so passionate about this. I just think that we need people in leadership that have the mindfulness, that trust their gut, that lead with that. I just think we'll solve the world's problems.
You've said it well. I think when we start to access deeper levels of intelligence than just the intellect is when we will be able to solve the stickier problems. The good news is I think mindfulness is becoming more and more mainstream. I do have quite a network now of people all over the world, from Brussels to Germany to India to here in Singapore, to all doing session of the work, right? Bringing mindfulness-based emotional intelligence, to the workplace, to senior leaders, to the workforce. So I think I imagine that a decade from now, our conversations will be much richer with more anecdotes about how that has transformed the world.
Awesome. And do you work with anyone in the US or Canada or anything at this point?
I do have clients as well as collaborators. So Search Inside Yourself, is a collaborator. The clients, many of them are under NDAs, so I wouldn't be able to mention it. But yes, a lot of the work that I do happens Obviously. In the US. As well as Europe. In fact, Asia, where I'm based, the work is still picking up, but it's great to see both the US and Europe leading the way on that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. You guys, please go follow her. Go say hi over on LinkedIn. Be sure to check out her website, and everything is linked in the show notes. Thanks, girl.
Thank you, Christina.